It is entitled The Future of U.S. Strategy in the Middle East Following the 2024 Election. We could add, the unpredictable future of U.S. strategy in the Middle East following the 2024 election. Now, in the United States itself, many people, as you know, had been warning for months ahead of the November elections that if a certain candidate were to win, this could bring the end of American democracy. That candidate did win. Will it bring the end of democracy, or will it be a refreshing new start for America? President-elect Trump supporters point out that there were no new wars under his watch when he was last in the White House. He said on the campaign trail that he was the peace candidate. But what kind of peace could he bring to the Middle East? Has the United States, many would ask, lost much, if not all, of its credibility in the region? These questions and more will be discussed over the next half hour or more. Please welcome the moderator of the session, Jonathan Panikoff, who is director of the Scowcroft Middle East Security Initiative at the Atlantic Council's Middle East program.
Thanks very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for being here. I am thrilled to be able to welcome today a tremendous panel to discuss what the U.S. is going to have as its policy and strategy for the next 4 years in the Middle East. Let me first welcome our panelists in order. Dr. Majid Al-Ansari, advisor to Prime Minister Al-Thani and spokesman. The Honorable Jason Greenblatt, former U.S. Middle East envoy for President Trump and the current founder of Abraham LLC. Dr. Sanam Vakil, the program director at Chatham House for the Middle East. Of the Gulf Research Center. Please. It's not often that I begin with a quote from Russian leaders, but Lenin is particularly instructive at the moment. Lenin said very famously, there are decades when nothing happens, and then there are weeks when decades happen. And I think in the Middle East, it may be hours or days is a better frame of reference at the moment. Dr. Majid, let me begin with you, if I could. Obviously, we are seeing mass changes in Syria right before our eyes. We are preparing to go into a bit of an unknown future, but that can be said for, I think, a lot of the region. The changes have been fundamental and astronomical over the last, frankly, couple of years. What is it that Qatar expects the U.S. role to be in the region going forward, and what role does Qatar want the U.S. role to be?
Well, Jonathan, first of all, thank you for having me, and I'm today. You know, my job as a spokesperson is because by the time I begin to speak and the time I end my whatever I'm saying, the realities on the ground have changed seriously. I mean, we were living in a world 2 days ago when the Syrian issue was quite stagnant. We didn't expect any changes there, and that was actually amongst the most stable within the region's context. And now we have in yeah, supremacy. It's not only Qatar. It's been quite the security structure on the alliance. A strategic relationship. We're always dependent on the strategic engagement, and this is why Qatar was classified as a major non-NATO ally by issues during the Arab Spring with the Obama administration. administration, Hamas and Israel with the Biden administration, and now we are beginning from day one actually to work with the incoming Trump administration and see how we can work together to further the cause for peace in the region. I think the two main asks right now, and I have to say that being the leader of the free world comes with a lot of responsibility. You know, heavy is the head. But we are not shy about asking the U.S. because we believe in the strategic partnership and the strategic presence of the U.S. in this part of the world. Regardless of what you might hear, you know, the rhetorical things you might hear about the U.S.'s role in the region here, Qatar believes very strongly that stability and security in the Middle East is dependent on U.S. engagement, U.S. understanding, and an open dialogue between us and the U.S. over the future of our region. First and foremost, we ask for positive engagement. And by positive engagement, we mean we need to listen to each other, we need to understand each other, and we need to go in our discussions beyond the specific interests of our states, but the interests, and go towards the interests of the region as a whole and international peace and prosperity. And the second is, we have to say it very clearly. If somebody coughs in Washington, D.C., everybody in the region here gets a tingle. So keep coughing to a minimum. That's the first thing we'd say to our friends in the U.S., but we have to make it very clear. We want to be working with you for the region here. We want to be in discussion with you over the region, and we should not be sidelined as the peoples and the countries in the region during these discussions. We can be helpful. We have proven to be helpful. And I think a lot of the problems that U.S. policy has faced in the region here was because at times certain parts of our region were sidelined from the discussion. It is now time to have a holistic discussion, and I think we have proven our worth in the region, we have proven our agency in the region, and it's time for us to have an open dialogue on it, and we are willing to work very closely with the incoming Trump administration. We are optimistic about what we are hearing about ending conflict in the region, about the quick engagement that is taking place right now, about the need to end a lot of the conflicts that are taking place even before President Trump gets to the White House. And we have great rapport with the President Trump, and the best experience that can be said when it comes to mediation. We have helped together bring about the end to the longest war in U.S. history through the mediation between Taliban and the United States. So we know we can work with President Trump. We have worked with President Trump. We have the track record of working with his administration, and we are sitting here with open arms waiting to deal with the incoming administration.
We're going to come back to some of these themes in a second, but Jason, let me ask you, you're the only person on this panel, maybe the only person on any panel, that's actually worked directly for President Trump. You served as Middle East envoy here during the first term, and I want to actually quote something. Last night, President Trump said in a tweet, he said, quote, "Syria is a mess, but it is not our friend. And the U.S. should have nothing to do with it. This is not our fight. Let it play out. Do not get involved." Jason, from your experience, you just heard Dr. Majid talk about U.S. needing to be engaged in the region. What does this portend for what you expect President Trump's second-term policy toward the region is going to be?
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you for hosting me here. I give the state of Qatar a lot of credit for inviting me, a proud American Jew, pro-Israel, but also pro-Qatar, pro-Saudi, pro-UAE, pro-GCC. And I'm happy to hear that I didn't disagree with one single word that Dr. Majid said. So let me explain President Trump's philosophy. I worked for him for 20 years in the private sector, 3 years in the White House. That tweet reminds me of the speech that he gave in Riyadh in May of 2017. If you haven't read it, if you haven't seen it, you should either watch it on YouTube or get the text. His general point is, we are not, the U.S. that is, we're not the policemen of the world. We don't want to get entangled in foreign wars. We don't want to tell you, I'm speaking now the way he did to the Middle East, but he probably means it throughout the world. We don't want to tell you what to do, how to live your lives. But if you're going to impact American interests, if you're going to impact the interests of our close allies and friends, for example, Israel and our GCC allies, then we are going to engage. But let's talk about what engagement means. He does not want American boots on the ground if he could avoid it. He wants the Middle East to help take care of itself. The fact that Syria has been so tragically ignored for all these years, and there's been so much suffering in Syria, is not America's problem first and foremost. It's the region's problem. And he wants the region to work hard to fix it. He'll engage, using that word, he'll support, he'll engage in dialogue, he'll help where he can help. But he believes the first position that needs to help Syria is the Middle East as a whole. For those of you that think he's not serious when he writes in all caps that this is not our war, he is very serious. Sometimes people think he's not thoughtful. He is extremely thoughtful. He takes in a lot of information, he synthesizes it, and he's not afraid to make decisions, and he's not afraid to speak bluntly. He gets a lot of criticism for how he speaks bluntly, but having been in the White House for a couple of years and knowing a lot of the leadership that has run America for a long time, trust me when I say some of the people say these things behind closed doors. The benefit of Trump is he says it in front of you, so you know exactly what he's thinking and where he intends to go. And the last thing I'll add, just because I'm not sure it'll come up later, and since I have the mic, I'm going to say it anyway. For those of you that think that you should not be working with Israel, and I'm not talking about normalization. I think normalization between Qatar and Israel, while one of my dreams, is not in the offing at the moment. But for those of you that are fighting against Israel, making outrageous accusations about genocide and all these crazy things that some people in the world are saying, and it's not Qatar and it's not Saudi Arabia, sometimes it's not UAE, these are all friends of and allies of the United States. You should realize that as pro-GCC, including Qatar as President Trump is, he has a very, very good and strong relationship with Qatar. He has an equally important and strong relationship with Israel. So if there's a piece of advice I could offer to the GCC and whatever other countries are in this room, it's work with President Trump to bring stability and calm here by also working with Israel, not constantly fighting Israel for things that every one of your countries would be doing if you were in the same position as Israel today. Thank you.
I think we probably will come back to this because I think it's important as we talk about the broader place Israel has in the region with regard to U.S. policy. But let me just ask Sanam first to talk about her perspective. Sanam, you are among the leading experts on the Middle East, but on Iran, frankly. I think everybody recognizes that 6 months ago, the Iranians were in a regional position that I think many people, many analysts, thought this is the best position Iran's been in years. Today, 6 months later, they may be in one of the most isolated positions they've been in, maybe not just in years, but in decades. That's how quickly things have moved. What will Trump coming back to the White House mean for Iran, and how are folks in Iran thinking about how to deal with President Trump this time around?
Thank you, Jason, and thank you to the Doha Forum for bringing us together. This is certainly a real pivotal moment for the Islamic Republic. I would say that Iran woke up on the tragic day of October 7th and recognized much earlier, perhaps, that it was in a difficult position. Iran has repeatedly miscalculated over the past 15 months, and I would say even from before, because its relations, even with close neighbors, time lows, and so these the regional landscape have brought Iran to this position. It's also important to acknowledge that Iran's strategy of forward defense, building relations with non-state actors through opportunity and taking advantage of profound weakness in other Arab countries was always a fragile strategy. It was not a strategy based on conventional parity. I think perhaps we can say that both Tehran and maybe all of us fell into this belief that Iran had achieved strategic depth And we've seen that all really come apart over the past months. And this is where Iran is today. I would say that Iran, while of course acknowledging its precarious position many months before, has been preparing for this precarious position at the same time. We are not at the end, I would say, of Iran in the region. It is certainly more back-footed than I have seen Iran in multiple decades. But the Islamic Republic does repeatedly show hands of pragmatism. And I have been thinking about past points of history. We oftentimes refer to Iran's moment of pragmatism coming to the end of a very long Iran-Iraq war, where they drank the poison chalice and began a decade of pragmatism through the 1990s. And I think that Iran is again finding itself in this position where it has profound defense weakness, it has lost its strategic depth, it is under the most severe sanctions it has been, and taking it to your question on President Trump, is fully expecting the return of maximum pressure and then some. They are aware that the president intends to reduce oil to as low as possible and push regional partners, including many American allies in the region, but also other countries, be it China and Iraq, to assist in maximum pressure. What has also been made clear, though, I think, for Tehran is, as Jason has laid out, that the president isn't looking to directly engage in conflict. It certainly has Israel's security on the forefront of its mind, but at the same time, this idea of sharing the burden of regional security has definitely come across loud and clear. So here is an opportunity, and I think this is what Iran has been preparing for over the course of the arrival of a new, perhaps maybe more moderate, not necessarily transformational, but more moderate president in Iran, that is making it clear that it is taking an Iran first, perhaps, economic approach, one that seeks to address sanctions and Iran's long-standing strategic loneliness. And we've also seen a greater degree of factional unity across Iran's divided system, with very clear messages coming through that Iran is again perhaps open to taking forward direct negotiations with the Trump administration. This isn't going to be easy. This is not something that is going to be a quick deal to achieve. But if it is achievable, it can actually be one of the ways to close down Iran's regional destabilizing behavior. Obviously, and most importantly, as President Trump has made clear, also it aims to address Iran's very alarming and advanced nuclear program. And finally, I think more important for the region, address a real component of regional stability and would take the burden of regional destabilizing behavior back to Iran through accountability, but also to regional states around.
Some real quick clarification, because you talked about Pezeshkian by implication, but what I didn't hear you say was the supreme leader, because I think the perception in the United States and frankly most of the West is that it's the supreme leader ultimately who's still the decision maker. Pezeshkian can do whatever he wants. He can be open to negotiations. The system can be open, but if the supreme leader is not going to go there, then it really makes no fundamental difference. Do you agree with that assessment, or has something changed fundamentally in Iran that we're not tracking well enough in the West that President Trump and the incoming administration need to understand and be aware of?
Well, I mean, thank you for pressing me on that. I think that there is, when I mentioned factional unity, I meant above it. You know, obviously the system is managed by the supreme leader, and there has been more clear and direct messages from the supreme leader's longtime associates, from Ali Larijani to Ali Akbar Velayati, really clearly sending flare signals that they're testing the waters for direct negotiations, and there have been efforts at reaching out, but the time is ticking. I think this is what is also urgent to mention. In October 2025, snapback sanctions must be invoked, otherwise the European partners of the JCPOA will lose that mechanism to put multilateral sanctions back on Iran. So the ship has already sailed, the train has left the station. We have a very short timeline to manage Iran's, the Iran crisis of 2025, as I like to call it. I think the system is united in getting there, but it's not an easy negotiation to deliver amidst the climate of the United States, and perhaps we can come back to that, because Iran has and will continue to be a toxic asset for Washington.
Dr. Sega, let me go to you. The GCC has been quite admirable in its public displays of unity, especially lately, on a number of issues. But we know behind the scenes there's still quite a few divisions. I had a senior GCC official tell me not that long ago, when I was talking about the potential for greater integrated air missile defense in the region and the U.S. role, he said the problem with this is that the GCC states individually trust the U.S., but none of them trust each other. I don't know if that's fully true or if that's an exaggeration, but when you look at President Trump coming back, what does it mean for the GCC? What is it going to mean for Saudi Arabia? What is it going to mean for the region as a whole in terms of how unified it will be, where you expect policy to go, and what the challenge that the region is likely to face?
First, thank you very much, and I'm glad to be here in Doha again. And thank you for Doha Forum and the Atlantic Council for organizing such a panel. Let me start by saying the trust between the GCC country is there. Sometimes could be differences, but it's not a disagreement. And differences can happen within the EU. We understand that within many of regional and international organizations, there are differences. And sometimes national interests will override a regional interest. That's normal. But when we talk about the trust in the US, I think I'd like to go back a little bit during the President Obama time when he said the red line in Syria in 2015, and none of it have happened. And then we moved to President Trump when we were attacked in our critical oil facility in Saudi Arabia. Yes, we have heard the condemnation, but at the same time, we did not get any proof of evidence who have done it. The reports say could have been some part manufactured in a specific country like this. But definitely that raises a big question. When the US drone were attacked, and then it was justifiable that it is on the other aerospace and not in the US. When he used terminology, it is not the US Army who has been attacked. All this question, raises a question. When we see the way and remember the way how he dealt with the Palestinian issue, he came up with a grand bargain through his son-in-law Kushner, which I met with him when he came first time to Saudi Arabia. At the same time, that deal did not talk about any Palestinian state or any political issue. It talks about economics, for the Palestinian. When he decided to move the embassy to Jerusalem, when he gave the Golan Heights, all of this concession that he gave because he was supposed to be a good friend, and because he made his first trip outside to the US, to the region here. We thought it's different, but now 2016 different than 2025. So we're looking forward to see how he is going to react in all these issues. What he said about Syria in his tweet, it's expected, to say what he said, but at the same time, I think we have far more crucial issues that we would like to see what sort of policy the US and the Trump administration are going to adopt, bearing in mind that whom they have chosen for the different position and where do they stand, where do they have their pre-position in those cases. But saying that, I still believe that he has a good relation in the region. He enjoys very much liked by the leadership here. We should worry about what decision come out of Washington, because that will have, whenever we remember the Black Monday on the stock market, and somebody said, if New York sneezes, the rest of the world catch cold. I think what Dr. Majid is saying, we don't want the US to cough, so we get a pneumonia here. This is why it's important to see how is the U.S. policy going to deal with all this issue. And I'll give you an example, for instance, in Iran, and Sanam can correct me if she wants to, but still, in both cases, we are very concerned. If he goes in a big rapprochement and de-escalation with Iran, we don't want that to happen at the account and the expense of the region here, because we don't want the region to be compromised. And if he goes in totally against and join hand with the Israeli in doing any military action, the response will be in the region. So I think, we need to see a balance, we need to see stability. Our position in Iran have been very clear. The Iranian people have the right to choose whatever regime they want. We are not in support of any fragmentation of the state of Iran. We wanted to see a unity of Iran, but at the same time, we want Iran to change their behavior. We want Iran to make sure to visit the concerned issue, which is the nuclear program, the interventionist policy, the energy security, the maritime also security, the support of different militia in the region. All of this Iran has to change, but I'm sure once Iran change that and once Iran adopt a new policy, we're hoping with the new presidential and with the new administration in Iran, this will give the region a much more greater prosperity, that the U.S. will be the biggest beneficiary. Iran is a huge market, the neighborhood is a huge market also to Iran. The Gulf is willing to continuously invest and do more on the economic side. So the U.S. will have a mega benefit. Should we coordinate, should we have a policy that really brings stability and security in the region?
So, sorry, I'm going to press you just for a second.
Yes.
Because I think for a number of Americans in the audience, what sounds like you're saying is what's been a common criticism. We don't want the U.S. in the region too much, but you can't go anywhere. And it's a very hard balance. So if we're saying in terms of Iran specifically, we don't want a full rapprochement with Iran between the U.S. and Iran, but at the same time, we don't want the U.S. to support what may be Israeli strikes if Iran's nuclear program proceeds and gets closer to the threshold. What's the balance that is being looked for in the region, and especially from Riyadh?
Well, the balance, we don't want to have a war against Iran. We don't want to have a military attack against Iran, because this will have very severe consequences on the region. But at the same time, we want to have a much better political dialogue. When you isolate Iran, flip the coin. If you flip the coin and you bring Iran into a better negotiation, into a better understanding, the concern is not to have a nuclear militarized program. The concern is not to have a long-range missile that can carry a nuclear weapon. That's for sure. We are all both in agreement. So how can we put up a political discussion and incentivization for Iran to change such a behavior in the region? And I think today Iran, they realize they lost Hamas, they lost Hezbollah, they lost Syria, and they will lose Iraq soon, by the way. In my opinion, that will happen, will continue. So they need to change their behavior. And also we need to rebuild the confidence with the U.S., that the U.S. work as a full partner in the region, taking into account our interests. And by the way, the Gulf is not the same 2016. The Gulf today is adopting two important pillars in their policy. One, independency, and the other one, neutrality. We are in support of the Ukrainian. But at the same time, we don't have to be the enemy of the Russian as the U.S. And I remember I was in Munich Security Forum. When I told Secretary Blinken at that time, I gave him a question. I said, what we are trying to do in the region is to be a neutral. In other words, we are in support of the unity of Ukraine. We are against the Russian aggression. We do a lot of humanitarian support. We can, and we do a lot of effort in terms of releasing the prisoner and the children through the Qatar, and also some of the prisoners through UAE and Saudi Arabia. But we don't have to be fully in the camp against Russia, because we still need to keep the dialogue with Russia, and we still need to push Russia for a political solution. So what we are aiming for is a political solution when it comes to a lot of the cases. This is why we need the U.S. pressure in Israel. Israel will never change unless there is a U.S. pressure. And that U.S. pressure should be there to reach a political solution for both. And by the way, the Palestinian has the right to determine their right. What Woodrow Wilson said in 2018, in 7th of December, when he came up with his 14 pillars, one of it was the right of determination. The Jewish state was based on, 1948 was based in what? In a self-determination. Why don't we give the 7 million Palestinian inside the right to determination, to determine what they want?
Let me pick up on this theme. Dr. Majid, Jason mentioned Israel and where the Trump administration may be on the Accords. We've heard Dr. Sager talk through the Palestinians. Obviously, Qatar has been intimately involved in the negotiations. You paused for a moment. It's now back on. Let's talk in the micro sense. Just getting to an agreement that would end the conflict and create a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. What is left that has to happen to actually get there, and then we'll expand out?
It's political will. I mean, we have been saying this for the past months now, that the language on the table was acceptable to both parties at one point. There is very little disagreement over the details of the agreement itself, but there is a political will that is missing. And there is a political utilization of this conflict. There is political utilization of even the talks themselves, and this is why we took a decision to pause our role as mediators, because we did not want to be used in prolonging the conflict. We did not want to become the alibi for prolonging the conflict, and we are quite optimistic with the statements coming in from the transition team that President Trump wants this done now, before he gets into the White House. And this is the pressure that we were talking about since day one from the US administration. We want pressure for a solution, not necessarily pressure on one party, not the other. We were not asking for specific pressure on a specific party. We were asking for pressure for a solution to happen. And that will happen when the United States decides it will happen. A lot of leverage is with the United States. We have done a lot with our partners in Egypt and the United States in the mediation track itself. We believe in the mediation track. It has produced results in the past, in 2014 and beyond that, and of course in 2023 in getting 109 hostages back to their families and hundreds of Palestinians back to their families, and pausing the war for 7 days. It's time now to end this conflict. It's time to start rebuilding. And I think, Jonathan, one of the main things that not only the US, but we in the region, the governments of the region, have to deal with, is the fact that the battle for the hearts and minds in the region, the narrative war in the region, is going to affect all of us, all of our stability collectively. Trust in governments, trust in the international community, trust in our overseas partners, in popular opinion, is diminishing. And it's diminishing for very good cause. We're talking about more than 50,000 people dead between the 7th of October and now. We're talking about conflicts, erupting everywhere in the region, and there is an inability, there is a paralysis in the international community in dealing with it. And I think there is a renewed sense of interest right now from all the parties, including, and as a result of the push by the transition team to end this now, which is something that we have always advocated for, that should be utilized. And I do applaud the transition team of being quite forward in this and moving immediately, even before getting into the White House, in trying to find a solution for this, because this is the only way forward. To regain the trust of people in the region and beyond, even people in the West, we have to be instrumental in finding an end to the violent cycle. We will not agree on every detail on how this should be dealt with. We will not agree on how to deal with the future of the Palestinian cause. We will not agree on how to create sustainable security in the region. But we have to agree that the bloodshed needs to stop now, without any reservation, and with very limited political interest embedded in the negotiation itself.
So let me follow up on 2 points quickly. One is the immediate and one is the longer term. In the immediate, there has been a call, Dr. Sager has talked about this just a moment ago, there's been a call that the U.S. needs to put more pressure on Israel. I think I'm going to talk to Jason about that in a second, about whether that's right and whether that pressure actually exists. I'm very publicly on the record among those who think that's more limited than people recognize. But there's a flip side to this. Is Qatar able and prepared with its Egyptian colleagues to put more pressure on Hamas to also reach a deal? And then the second part of this is the long term. Obviously, it's a challenge, but on the point of self-determination that Dr. Sager highlighted, The flip side is, in Israel today, even among the most left-wing of folks, the folks who are in the Meretz party and to the left of Meretz, the idea of a two-state solution is wholly unfathomable. Fundamentally, it is just unthinkable, and there's a view that the international community has been completely one-sided in the same way I think many in the international community in this region view Israel as prosecuting a war in a way that was unnecessary. It's the complete inverse. How do you actually get past that? What can a ceasefire now do to start that process?
Well, I think first and foremost to address what you just said, pressure on both sides is necessary in any conflict. You don't mediate between friends, right? You mediate between adversaries, you mediate between those who, at many points in many conflicts, are aiming to basically either diminish each other or abolish each other, right? And this is what we are seeing right now in this conflict. And therefore, it is on all of us to apply all the pressure, to use all the leverage that we have to end the cycle of violence, right? And then start discussing the future of what we should be doing in the region and beyond. And to that end, Qatar has utilized all the leverage that it has, but it is limited leverage. It is leverage that is linked to our ability to conduct our role as mediator. So when we want to use our leverage, we announce we are going to freeze our role as mediator, and we announce that we will no longer be the platform or the alibi for the conflict to continue. And this is what we use, and we have received the result as out of that of re-engagement that we have seen in the past week, and we have done that in April when we said we are reassessing our role. And therefore, I don't know what more pressure can be applied, but I am quite sure that all of us collectively need to use our pressure and our leverage together. Pressuring one side while the other party has a free hand will not work, and that goes for both sides. Now, on the other part of your question, the question of peace is quite a difficult one because it's not sustainable in most cases. What we need to do right now is to hit the pause button in order to be able to think collectively. And I think that's one of the main problems we've always had on this issue, is that we don't think collectively. We think in isolation. We prepare ourselves in isolation. And then we meet, and it's a deaf talking to a blind over an issue that they don't understand collectively. Right? What we need to do right now is we need to sit down together. We need to have that moment, that pause, that calm that is needed for us on both sides of the situation. Those who are working as mediators, those who are parties to the conflict, those who are from outside the region who are helping to sit together and to understand exactly what peace means in the region. Peace today in the region doesn't mean an agreement between Hamas and Israel. It means the sustainability of prosperity across this region. If you put your one finger now on the Atlantic Ocean on the west of our region, and one finger on Afghanistan, draw a line. How many stable countries do you have in the middle that can provide for its people, that can work towards peace and prosperity? They are in the minority. Rather than having pockets of conflict, we have pockets of stability in this part of the world. No one actor, Israel or other in the region, can protect itself without paying dividend into regional and wider regional peace and prosperity, and that doesn't happen without engagement, that doesn't happen without talking to each other, and we are willing to do it, and we know that our partners in the United States have been willing to do it, but we need everybody to be on the same page, in engagement, regardless of what we believe.
Jason, let me turn to you. Dr. Madra suggests that everybody needs to hit the pause button in order to be able to ultimately move forward. Will the Trump administration be eager to do that, willing to do that? What would that entail from a U.S. perspective going forward? What would that actually mean? We all are aware of the Abraham Accords that actually we're supposed to start this process toward regional stability and regional integration. Is that what we're looking to go back to, or is it something different?
Well, first of all, I want to say I appreciate Qatar's involvement. I have long said that those who criticize Qatar for trying to help mediate and end the cycle of violence and bring the hostages home, their criticism was misplaced, and you see that now with President Trump himself asking Qatar to get re-involved and Qatar being willing to try to do that. So thank you for that. I think that there's just no way that President Trump isn't going to be interested in trying to expand the Abraham Accords. Where I think many in this audience, and certainly you disagree, is that many think that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the be-all and end-all, and if everything gets resolved between Israel and the Palestinians, all will be great in the Middle East. And that's just not true. The Syria thing has nothing to do with Israel. What happened in Lebanon, obviously there are shades that have to do with Israel, but what happened in Lebanon, and the reason Lebanon is suffering so deeply, is not Israel's fault. Yemen is not Israel's fault. Afghanistan is not Israel's fault. So what the Trump administration did, and I think they're going to do it again, is try to decouple the Israeli-Palestinian issue from everything else. That doesn't mean they shouldn't try to solve the Israeli-Palestinian issue, and I'm sorry you didn't like the peace plan that I wrote a lot of, but that did give the Palestinians something tremendous. No, it had an economic part, that's absolutely true, but it had about 60 pages of a political solution, which even today my Palestinian friends are saying they made a huge mistake walking away from it before they even read the plan. Yes, there needs to be a political solution, and yes, I agree, Dr. Majid, what that solution is we very much differ on. But there's no question everybody wants to solve the Israeli-Palestinian issue. But while you're doing that, we have to learn to walk and chew gum at the same time and try to solve all the other problems in the Middle East so that instead of just a handful of countries in the region, as you describe, who are bright spots for a future, we can help prop up many of these countries and all the young people here who are striving for a better future. If we could do it at the same time, that's terrific for everybody, and I'm sure President Trump would love to do that. But the reality is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been lingering for so long, is so complicated to try to fix, and after October 7 and now this conflict between Israel and Hamas so deeply entrenched, it's going to be hard to fix that today. Does that mean we shouldn't pick up the pieces everywhere else? No. I want to ask a question of the audience because I think I know the answer. I think I'm the only person that has been in the line of missile fire in Riyadh and in Tel Aviv from Iranian proxies, Houthis and Hamas. How many people in the audience have been in the line of fire, missile fire, in both of those cities? Okay, so I'm not the only one. Who are you? That is what President Trump is trying to fight. He wants the evil out of this region, but he also expects these countries to drive those terrorists out. That's almost an exact quote from his May of 2017 speech. Drive the terrorists out. If you're able to drive the terrorists out without America's help, ideally with America's help, then solving all of these problems, including, hopefully, the Israeli-Palestinian issue, things will go much better.
Jason, quick follow-up for you, and then we're quickly running out of time. I've got additional follow-ups for our other panelists, but when you say decouple, are you thinking specifically about President Trump trying to achieve, frankly, what the Biden administration has, but has been unsuccessful in normalization with Saudi Arabia specifically, or are you thinking about other issues?
It's definitely normalization, but we don't even have to set the price so high at the beginning. It's a very rough and complex and difficult time at the moment. I think cooperation between these countries and Israel and America to bring safety and security and prosperity, even if there's no formal normalization, would be a big win. And if we could do that at the same time with Israel and the Palestinians, that's terrific. I don't think it's realistic, and I don't think putting pressure on Israel, which many argue for, is going to help. And I don't think America, certainly not a Trump administration, is going to put that kind of pressure on Israel, nor should it.
Dr. Sager, let me turn to you first before I flip back to Saddam, because I want your reaction. It could be Saudi, it could be something lower level. I think there is a disagreement about a lot of folks in this region saying the root of all of the problems is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Jason's obviously saying, no, it's not. From your perspective, where Saudi Arabia is today has moved quite extensively from its early comments during the war, as we've seen them, in terms of possible normalization and pauses, and we'll get to it, to today we've seen the Crown Prince himself say that without a Palestinian state, we're not going to normalize with Israel. Can you decouple in the way Jason is talking about? And should the administration that's incoming try to do so?
the very important issue that in the Gulf region and even during the Ministerial Council meeting for Foreign Affairs, they did confirm the right of the coexistence. So there's no question about the coexistence. There's no question about the Israeli state. We no longer in our official media, we call Israel the Zionist state as they used to. They call it the State of Israel. But at the same time, Richard Nixon, he said, I hope that the Israeli will come into peace because they live in a leg of hatred. And the leg of hatred, they created it in a way. But to eliminate that issue, the Iranians have traded with the Palestinian issue since the Iranian revolution. They've always put the Palestinian and the Israeli conflict is in their top agenda. They used to have the children with asaba on the head saying "At-tariq ila al-Quds min huna." You know, they used to use that one. So what we are trying to say, we can reach an agreement in the two-state solution. It's something that can work. You know, if what I'm saying, I mean the U.S. pressure, I'm not saying what the Iranians are saying, wipe it out. No, we're not talking about wiping out Israel. We're talking about using a political means for a better understanding so Israel can enjoy a peace in the region and the region can enjoy peace and can have a better understanding and a better security of the region. Saudi Arabia would not normalize with Israel under this condition. Short of stopping the war, allowing humanitarian issues. We understand the desire of the Hamas militant group exiting Gaza. We understand the Israeli wishes to have a friendly administration in Gaza. You know, all these issues, it's under the release of the prisoner, but at the same time we have to give the Palestinian their right.
But sorry, and I apologize for interrupting, but just quickly, what I want to get to specifically, though, is let's say we do get to a ceasefire, which President Trump is pushing for as well. I think everybody is looking to get there. In the coming year, can you have the type of normalization or even progress toward normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel without a Palestinian state? And if the Trump administration comes back and says, no, we're going to try to make the types of progress that Jason was talking about, can you do that if you don't actually have a Palestinian state that's at least on a way to being established?
No, we need to have a viable state. You know, out of question.
Let me very quickly, as we're running out of time, Sanam, Dr. Sager talked about the Iranians picking up the Palestinian issue, and I find it is interesting because Israel and Iran may agree on nothing, but both actually have not been supportive of a two-state solution. Different ways, different reasons, but it's actually maybe the only thing they agree on, actually, in their official documents. Jason also talked about the proxies. How much of an impediment is the Trump administration going to have to deal with when it comes to what's left of the proxies? Obviously, Hezbollah is greatly diminished, Hamas is greatly diminished, but the Houthis continue to cause a significant challenge for everybody, frankly. What is the Trump administration going to have to do in order to resolve this? So not just for international commerce, but for stability in the region, for protection of Saudi Arabia, of our Gulf allies, that we can actually be involved. Does the U.S. have to take a bigger role in dealing with this?
Big question for the last 2 minutes. I would say it's a lot to ask for the U.S. At a moment where domestic priorities and geopolitical tensions are at the forefront, I think, of the incoming administration's mind. But we have seen, certainly over the past 2 years, that Middle Eastern conflict never stays in the Middle East. And so I would say that the U.S., alongside its partners, and this is where working multilaterally with Europe, but particularly with the Gulf countries, has never been more urgent. I think actually what we're saying on this panel, perhaps maybe not so explicitly, is that the real deal of a century for President Trump is not just, let's say, outreach to Iran and perhaps arrival at a more meaningful and regionally focused arrangement with Iran that includes obviously curtailing its nuclear program, but also one that addresses Israel's security and Palestinian self-determination. So in both cases, you're dealing with broad regional security, Israel's security, Palestinian self-determination, and this is the thing we don't talk about enough, is Iran's security as well. So here's where the compromises have to come together. Here's where the work with regional partners very much matter. And since the regional landscape is not the same as 2016, and since the region has been very much destabilized, rightly so, by the war of the past year and the pronounced loss of life that is unimaginable, this is where things can make a meaningful step forward. It is time for the Middle East to fix the Middle East, but the U.S. has a bold role and responsibility, and the Gulf states have very clearly shown through de-escalation and continued dialogue that they're willing to step up, to mediate, and to manage some of these conflicts. So it's a lot to ask in the next 4 years, if not 2, but I think things are possible. It just requires a lot of momentum.
That's going to have to be the very last word. Thank you to the Doha Forum. Thank you to all of you in the audience for staying for this panel. And thank you, of course, to our panelists, most of all.